Welcome to the Music Business Buddy, the podcast decoding how the modern music industry actually works. I'm Johnny Amos, industry consultant, artist manager, producer, educator, and author of The Music Business for Music Creators. Every Wednesday, I explore the ideas, technology, and industry shifts shaping the future of music. This show helps creators navigate the rapidly changing business of music.
Hello everybody and welcome. I am so excited about this week's episode because it is the return of the great Keith Jopling. Keith featured all the way back into episode 27, and in fact he's actually the first time I've ever had a repeat guest on the podcast. For anybody that's not familiar with Keith, so he kind of sits, he has sat now for the last, couple of decades or more, at the intersection between music technology, consumer insights and business strategy. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest music industry consultants and strategists in the UK. He's the former global head of strategy at Spotify. He's a researcher and educator. He is all sorts of different things. He is just a fascinating guy and one of the smartest minds I've ever met in my life. The last time he was on the podcast, he was talking about a book. And then one of the things I've noticed about Keith over the last 18 months or whatever it is that's passed since I last spoke to him, is that he's brought out two books. And one of them in particular is called Body of Work. And it really captured my imagination. In fact, I'll be honest with you, it really touched me. And you'll hear me talk about it to Keith today in the interview because it challenged me. It's not only one of the greatest music, it is in fact the greatest music industry book I've ever read. And it's one of the best books I've ever read. And I don't think it's even targeted at people in the music industry or people that create music. It's just a really superb, humble account of consumership of music. It's fascinating. It's called Body of Work. I'll put a link to it in the description of this episode. So that is who my guest is today. I do ask Keith about that book on a couple of the questions, but generally we just talk quite a lot about music, about the creator economy, about where things are at. So I'm going to hand over to the interview and enjoy. Keith, welcome back to the Music Business Buddy. It's good to have you here.
Johnny, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it last time. I thought we had a great conversation. I've been looking forward to this.
Oh, likewise, mate. Likewise. Well, Keith, I've got to start by mentioning Body of Work, right? Since we last spoke, you've actually written two books in very close succession, by the way, or published in close succession.
Yeah.
And I know we spoke a little bit about it when you were last on here, but I've got to start by talking about Body of Work. It might just be, I hope I don't embarrass you by saying this, Keith, but it might just be the best music book I've ever read.
Well, that's amazing.
I really mean it. It's because it's more than just a great book about music or music consumption or the music business. It's just a great book. You know, it got me questioning a lot of things about my own listening habits, about wanting to spend more time listening to albums all the way through. You know, I heard an interview with Ed Sheeran not so long ago where he was talking about the idea of how he plays every week. He plays one vinyl record in its entirety to his family. And that's just something that they do as a family. And it really touched me. And I thought, wow, you know, with a little 5-year-old at home, we should be doing that, right? You know, you know, and I know that's something that's kind of mentioned. I'm sort of paraphrasing your book when I'm talking about that concept because there's so many things in there that are just gems. Yeah. But congratulations. I haven't read Riding the Rollercoaster yet, but it's literally on my desk. So that's the next one. But thank you for what you've done with that book, Keith. It's amazing.
Well, thanks very much for saying that, first of all. I think a bit like when you ask a musician, you know, why do they do what they do? And they say, you know, it's not fame and fortune, and it certainly isn't but through writing books. It's just touching people, really. Just changing the way they think, changing behavior is amazing. And just having you say that you've thought twice about things and you've gone back to, you know, especially you know, you're a music fan and lover as well as working in music. But when people tell me they've bought a vinyl player and they've gone back to listening to their favorite albums and things like that. And when people tell me they've really stopped to think about what they've not been doing, which is listening, then I know the book has hit the spot. And that's partly why I wrote the book. So there is
Yeah.
an agenda there. And I'm glad it's coming across. So, yeah, thanks very much for saying that. I need to get a
Oh,
copy to Ed Sheeran, don't I?
I know. I tell you what, I think he would love it. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure he would. I've got to start by asking you about something in chapter 7, Keith. Because it was well, I loved every chapter, but chapter 7 really captured my imagination, especially on the evolution of the album model. And I wanted
Yeah.
to ask you because I was reading it and I was thinking, is he going to talk about the Brat campaign? And you hadn't mentioned it, and then I thought, oh, okay, here it comes. Because
Yeah.
Charlie X's Brat campaign, the entirety of it, has been pretty heralded throughout the music industry. And I had Ralph W. Peer from Peer Music on it a few months ago, and he was
Okay.
raving about it. And
Yeah.
as of many other people. Do you think, with your sort of strategic mind, do you think that album campaign was a sort of elongated reactive marketing thing, or do you think that album actually hit a nerve in youth culture in the way that albums are supposed to? Because it might be a bit of both, but I can't help but wonder if it's one or the other, and I wonder what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I think it is a bit of both because in retrospect, um, I think she's been great, Charlie XCX, as being a spokesperson for her own creative process. And I see this more and more with artists. They're using their social media to lift the lid on their creative process and tell us how it is. And I think that's great. I think it's a really great use of social media. And she's really engaged, isn't she, with the industry? You can see what she's doing. She's been turning up for in-depth interviews. She did a really useful TikTok that I don't think I saw the TikTok before I wrote the book. I think I saw it after she wrote. No, I did see it during the writing process of the book because I mention it, where she says, it looks like an accident because when something hits the culture, to some extent, it's an accident, isn't it? Because it's gone further than any campaign would have expected. The campaign has lit something up in the public's consciousness, and then it kind of goes big. It blows up. So everything worked, but there was definitely a campaign, and she led it, didn't she? There was a concept behind the album. It was a throwback thing that she wanted to represent. She did it very well. Even that kind of pixelated green cover that really caught on. I think it looked a bit cheap and nasty. That was the idea behind it,
Yeah.
and it was one of, I think, a selection of many different covers that they looked at. And so she did say this is 2 years of my life I've spent thinking about this, as well as just putting the work out. I've thought about how to present it. And then lo and behold, it caught on, but it did take a while. It wasn't a number 1 album as far as I know. I think it got to number 2 in the chart. So it was, I love it because it was a throwback to what albums used to do, as you say. Albums used to be these big events, but they would take time to bed in. And, by the time you got to the second or third single, maybe it was one of the singles that caught fire, but then people realized how good the album was. And then word of mouth kicks in, and then you've cracked it.
Yeah.
And it goes international, and you've really cracked it. So I think it was definitely a bit of both. And, I've got to take my hat off to the people behind the campaign and the label, because they continued with it, right? So I think one of the things that the music industry generally has become better at is reacting and responding to something that blows. I think they've just gotten not so good at making great pieces of work successful on their own terms. I think they're giving up on stuff too quickly. But when it is really blowing up, they're amplifying it instead, pressing all the buttons that need to press. So it's really interesting. I would say one final thing about Brat. because it's also done a bigger job than just, expanding Charlie XCX's career to the next level. And she's been going for a long time, so she was trying to do that, and that's a success. She's now a global superstar and a movie actress. Of course, more controversially, but it did more, didn't it? It helped to bring the album back into the consciousness of the fan, especially that younger, more female orientated fan base who now get it and like, okay, album's interesting. So now we've got Olivia Rodrigo, very album focused. And of course, before Brat, Billie Eilish, very album focused. Taylor Swift, of course, very. So I love this. I just love the fact that the top tier artists, especially the women, are really getting behind the album as a creative force.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why no one could kill it, Johnny.
No.
Not talking about anyone in particular here.
Of course. Do you know, it's interesting because, sometimes like as time goes by and we look back on something in retrospect and go, oh, that year was quite pivotal. And 2024, I mean, you alluded to this brilliantly in the book. 2024 in particular was a very, very big, important year for a lot of the female artists that you mentioned there. It's really interesting to sit here only in 2026 and already think back to like a couple of years ago and go, that was massive. I'm really glad that happened because from then we've seen newer artists that are wanting to put albums out and build a campaign around it, which, is also a really interesting subject. I want to ask you about this, actually. I'll come back to the album thing in a minute, but I've got a question for you. It's a bit of a stinker, right? What constitutes a hit record in 2026? What do you think?
I try and define it actually in Rollercoaster. So you need to read on.
Okay. I should have read that before today. Okay.
Also, incidentally, by the way, last time I was on your podcast, it was the first time I'd mentioned I'd written a book, and I hadn't found a publisher at that point. So that was Riding the Rollercoaster. I became Riding the Rollercoaster. So I was a bit sheepish about sharing it because I wasn't sure the book would ever come out at that point.
Oh, wow. That's all happened quickly then.
So it did come out, but we put it out second. So I ended up writing the books same time and swapping them over. And we thought, let's put body of work out first because it was almost more topical. It's interesting that you've read it first. I think that probably was the right way around. Anyway, in Riding the Rollercoaster, I talk about 5 routes to long-term success, as in the longevity thing.
Okay, right.
And just quickly, the 5 routes are: have a hit record, get dropped by your label, make a classic album, become a cult artist, and build your brand. And I think I'd had those routes defined last time we spoke.
Yes, I
just
remember.
Not quite in that way, perhaps.
Okay.
But yeah, have a hit single, of course, has completely changed. So before the 21st century, I think we're talking before the 21st century, you could have a chart hit and, a top 10 or top 20 chart hit or a Billboard 200 hit would potentially see your career for the next 10 years. If it was a good enough hit, and what you followed up with decent material, and you could almost get a career out of a hit song. Of course, that's now gone because the charts really don't mean much to the public. The charts are now an industry thing, and they're a flash in the pan. So even if you get a chart hit, it doesn't matter. So it's all streaming now. We know that. And so I try and measure, well, what's a streaming hit? Because, 5 million isn't necessarily that. 10 million isn't necessarily that. Maybe it is if you do it in a short space of time. But yeah, I think it's a combination of streaming numbers, if you like, depending on where you are as an artist. But I'm trying to encourage everyone. So I say, like, to some extent, a hit record now is the one that your crowd is singing back to you the loudest. The one where they know all the lyrics. that's the one to take as affirmation that you can write a good song, and you work that song and get it as far as it can go. And hey, if it doesn't become a big streaming success, or it doesn't get on the radio, or it doesn't get in the charts, don't worry. That's a hit song and you know it. But essentially, it's now a streaming hit. But really, the equivalent of a top 10 hit used to do for you in the last century, you really need a song that's got 50 million, maybe 100 million streams now, don't you? Before you can really be regarded as someone who's going to get backing from a label, someone who's going to get recognition, because that's going to transfer into your monthly listeners, and you're going to use that as a badge to get noticed elsewhere. That song's probably just going to end up running on various playlists, so you get a chance to get another song on a playlist. But that's a lot. I mean, it's a really big barrier to hit.
Yeah, it is. It is. Do you know what? I can't help but wonder, Keith. I'd be interested to see what you think on this. I wonder if the metric right now for many artists in that context is how many streams has this had? And then we can go deeper and go, let's have a look at, let's say, the listener to stream ratio, or how many saves, and it'll give you a further indication as to what that might look like, source of streams, etc. But maybe, just maybe, perhaps even 5 years from now, it won't be how many streams it's had, but more so how many times has it been licensed. And then it turns into, especially if we really start to engage with the micro licensing model, if media is the thing that has been driving music's economy really in the last sort of 20 years, let's say. And now we're changing the way that we consume media. So if that, and I know there's a lot of tech startups out there now moving towards the micro licensing model, perhaps that might be a metric for, oh yeah, I've had, 112 licenses globally in the last 3 years. Right. Thank you very much. That's a metric which we can plow into a fintech company, for example. When you first made me aware of fintech, maybe that would be a thing. I don't know.
Well, it's an interesting idea. I mean, what I'm really trying to sort of get away from with this idea that, your hit is the one that the fans sing back to you is to just not try and measure it, because I think this whole idea of measurement is one of the things that's really, it gets artists kind of despondent about things,
Yeah, it does.
and
It does.
and they didn't really like it in the first place. Most artists didn't get into making music so that it could be measured. Of course, they get sort of addicted to it, when it happens. But they don't really want to be constantly reminded that they've got to hit a number as such. That's not how they measure success. And in the end, the funny thing about it is I think we've got to meet in the middle somewhere, because I see where you're coming from. But what I fear about, say, the licensing metric is that we're feeding the beast, And I think we've got to find a way where we can define success, creative success, and to some extent, maybe cultural power, brand power, without getting sucked into more and more kind of tech and financial metrics. Because I think they are what's, they're not killing creativity, but they're making it more and more commodified, and streaming already did that to some extent, and there's been a lot of benefits to it. But I think as we get into this sort of whole commodification, selling the catalogs, trading the catalogs, it's just very, very separate. It's a very separate world from what the artist really wants to do. So I don't know. It's an interesting idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, that's a very, very, very good point, right? Because artists and songs have always been and will always be at the epicenter of this entire discussion, right? Without them, we have nothing. We don't have a business. And you're right. I think that kind of stuff does rub a lot of artists up the wrong way. Sometimes I've noticed just recently when I spoke to some artists about, and I've trying to encourage people to think more long term about their catalogue. And very often it goes over their heads. And I don't blame them, because it would have done with me in my 20s. I wouldn't have been interested in thinking about what my publishing might look like in 40 years, because I'm thinking about next week or right now,
Mm.
And I know that a lot, Spotify and let's say AI as well, right? They're often framed as like symbols of progress, right? And yet a lot of younger artists feel very uncomfortable, if not repulsed, in fact, by both, and they struggle to articulate as to exactly why that might be. But is there, do you think, a deeper cultural shift around authenticity and value and what it actually means to have a music career?
Yeah, I think for sure. Yeah, I think that shift is happening as we speak. And I think it's a really interesting phenomenon. I think one of the reasons why live has bounced back so much from COVID, when we questioned it, didn't we, whether it was ever really going
Yeah.
to come back, but it absolutely has. It's come back bigger than ever. And on every level, from the kind of superstar stadium and arena tours, which have become super sophisticated. We've got these stadium residencies, and now we've got these super arena tours, which are thought through theatrically, and technically amazing. All the way down to the grassroots stuff, where you could see the artists are putting a bit more thought into their performance. And I think that's seen to be the real way to connect,
Yeah.
the real way to grow your art and master your craft. And that's visceral, isn't it? That's absolutely live. So that's one kind of antidote, if you like, I think, to the whole what you've just been talking about. There's a few others as well. I think the focus on the album, to me, that's interesting. That's artists. There's this great creative race to make great albums, right? I mean, we've noticed this, haven't we? I mean, every
Yeah.
week now there is a sort of epic album that comes out. I thought the Ray album was epic.
Yeah.
Even on an indie level, talking to Jessica Hoop on my podcast later, her new album is
Ah.
fantastic. Long Wave Home. It's a real work of art, So that's another way that they're coming back. And then I spoke to Kurt Vile earlier this week on the podcast. So that one's going to come out in a couple of weeks. And I said to him, like, when you're a young artist up and coming through, because a lot of them are looking up to artists like him. It's like
Yeah.
is the indie slacker guy who's now actually a bit of a superstar, on every level. And he said something interesting to me, which is, yeah, you've got to keep getting your music out there. Try not to be ignored, but also, physical. Yeah, again, at every level. It's the same with the books. I was just looking for one to put up. Let me get a book here. Right.
Yeah.
Do a bit of advertising, Johnny. There.
Yeah, do
This
it.
thing. I mean, I haven't sold any, virtually any, digital copies. It's this thing is selling, and I want it to be a physical thing. And I think a lot of artists feel the same way at all levels. Like, get some CDs made, old school style. I think Kurt Vile said CDRs. Get some CDRs made, Get some vinyl pressed if you can. Use Elastic Stage. Get some vinyl pressed. Get some
Yeah.
merch. Sell some T-shirts. Print on demand. Because that's the stuff that's really sticking, I think. I'm not saying, a really great creative social media account won't get you far. It clearly will. But I'm talking about building fans here and building your career as opposed to exposure and reach. And the two things are entirely different. We know that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Do you know, on that subject, because the physical side of things there, I'm glad you mentioned the book, because I almost was nodding along going, I'm really glad that I bought the physical copy and not the digital copy.
Thank you.
And
So am I.
yeah. And in chapter 5 of that very book, it kind of implies that there is a sense of sort of album appreciation that's perhaps fashionable, maybe even more so than album consumption, although you very articulately, of course, talk about the idea of how it's difficult to measure album
Mm.
consumption. Now, do you think that it might be the case with, let's say, for example, Gen Z, the listening habits that are being sort of technically opposed upon them, is that they are listening to less albums, even though they appreciate them?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, no question about it. That the whole mystery to this body of workbook is, and I knew it before I set out to find the answer, that I wasn't going to find the answer through data. I mean, I've been working with data for many, many years. When it's there, it's great. You can get an answer. When it's not there, don't attempt to, yeah, don't attempt to construct it, you know? And I think,
Mm.
for example, the album chart is a misnomer, really. It's a kind of false construct because it's just streams of tracks added together. And even there's rules like the biggest 2 tracks on an album are excluded from the album count to try and I was going to talk about this in the book, but it got too technical. I want the book to be read by everybody. You know, it's not a music industry book, as you said. I'm really pleased you said that. But it's we're making this stuff up. I mean, we know how many people are buying vinyl, yeah, of course, and CDs. But as you say, a lot of them are buying to collect, or they're buying as a. It might be a show of respect to the artist and fandom. That's clear. So essentially, they're buying it as merch, and you know, I've caught my daughter looking at the liner notes of a Lana Del Rey album while she's playing the album on her phone.
Okay.
You know, so she's got the vinyl. Like, put the record on. You know, she's got. I mean, she's got a record player now. That might have been before she had a record player in her room. She got my old kit. But you know what I mean. You know, it's. We're not doing what I advocate and what Ed Sheeran's doing once a week with his family. We're generally speaking, we're not doing that. And to some extent, I think that's an opportunity because we should encourage everybody to start doing that because it's a fantastic experience. Listening to an album at home, whether it's vinyl or on your headphones, is a really good experience. And once you start doing it once a week or twice a week, you will keep on doing it. Because it's nourishing, as opposed to, you know, looking at this and scrolling through and all that. We know that's not nourishing. It's addictive, but it's not nourishing. So I think this is an opportunity to encourage people to do it more. But my argument in the book is it doesn't really matter because the album is still the cultural glue that the artist needs to make good songs. So they realize that they've always known that to write a good song, to have a hit, you've got to write a bunch of songs. And those bunch of songs are, you know, out of a certain time frame and a phase of their life. And therefore there may be a theme and concept behind it, whether it's a breakup or they've fallen in love or they want to talk about the state of the world. I love this idea
Yeah.
that's unbreakable. That's an unbreakable format. So it doesn't really matter if we're listening to it or not. The container will continue. And I'm totally confident that it will continue forever. You know, whatever
Yeah.
tech comes along, AI, you just throw it all out there. I don't care. The album will continue for a bunch of reasons, but because it works.
Yeah. Do you know, I always being an eternal optimist, Keith. I've always trying to look for like the good in something and kind of like, you know, that's why I don't tend to moan about my stuff on the podcast because what's the point, right? And when I started to read your book, well, just before I read it, I thought, I want to believe that the album can live forever. And when I finished the
Yeah.
book, I thought, I now know that it can. And
Yeah.
that's one of the many positive things that came out of it. And I really thank you for that because it made me smile so much to think that, because they are time capsules, right? Like, do you remember a few years ago when Taylor Swift re-recorded I think, was it the Red album or one of those
Yeah,
albums where the whole thing with the masters, and she did her
yeah,
new versions, and there's kind of like the old versions of that album, and she tried to replicate it as best she could, but of course she can't, because she sounds a little bit older, right? In the nicest way
yeah,
possible. She
yeah,
should, right?
yeah.
We all do. Like, 10 years on, a few years on, we all sound a little bit different. We feel a little bit different. And it's very important that that's captured in a certain way. But the point I'm reaching with this is that they are time capsules in the same way as this moment is right now. It's a time capsule. It'll be somewhere and it represents what happened in this time. And that's really special. And I think albums, in some ways, perhaps do that better than songs do.
Yeah, I think they do. They do it better than songs do, because you can map out a classic career album by album, can't you? I mean, even Michael Jackson, somebody who's, in the culture now because of a terrible film, actually. I haven't seen it. So I'm judging a film here that I haven't seen, but I can kind of imagine there's a dreadful film. It doesn't matter. It's done the job. It's brought him back. That's what they did it for. But I mean, essentially, he's like a hitmaker artist. But still, if you want to understand Michael Jackson, if you're a young fan now going to delving back into Michael Jackson's career, you do it album by album, don't you? You see the change from The Wall in the early 80s? I might get my timings wrong, but from The
Yeah, Off the
Wall, which
Wall.
is
Yeah, late
off The
70s.
Wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, so still very much a sort of nod to Motown, but going out as bridging into being a pop artist, and then Thriller, of course, and then Bad. That trajectory is classic, and it's album by album, right? And that's the way we understand artist careers, and that's the way we understand our own love of music for a certain generation. So I understand how that's no longer the case out there in consumer land. But as I say, I think that's an opportunity, because kids now are discovering Michael Jackson album by album. I think Taylor Swift fans have now got it. I think they've kind of got the idea. And in the book, I talk about Folklore and Evermore, which released during the pandemic, of course, being instrumental to this idea, because it was a shift in tone and genre and everything else, very cohesive projects, dropped without any fanfare. And that kind of hit home to Taylor Swift's massive fan base, young fan base as well, that she's an album artist. And so this is how they think. So I think people are catching on. Of course, the vinyl resurgence is really helping. Even the kind of more gimmicky stuff like the cassette coming back and CDs being a bit niche again. All that stuff is just a great opportunity for. I'm almost envious of young fans that have been sort of groomed on streaming, if you like, can now go back and discover artist careers album by album. They might be young, but they probably haven't got the time. They're going to have to be selective, because I think the one thing about albums is that they take time. And if you want to appreciate an album really, you've got to listen to it. I mean, I talk about, my favorite albums in the book. I'm sure you can say the same about your favorite albums. I've listened to them hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Hundreds of times.
Well, it's funny actually, because I remember when you in the beginning of the book, and you dedicated it to Queen and their albums, and I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. And I thought, well, I'll find out why. And I read it, and I did find out why. It's interesting that you mentioned Michael Jackson, because Michael Jackson and Bad was that for me, for what Queen was for you.
Okay.
And so that was a really interesting little segue that you mentioned that,
Right.
So
is Bad your favorite album? What? Give me a couple of examples of what you'd put in your top 10.
Albums ever. Well, they're always going to be biased, aren't they? Because you're always going to be led by the things that hit you most
Yeah.
impressionably when you were younger. But bad, certainly. But then I discovered, not until years later, really, did I discover Thriller, which I thought
Okay.
was, infinitely better. And then by then I started to understand music better and therefore sort of appreciate it more. But in other ways, when you start to create music, I think that you lose some of that objectivity because you're thinking about the numerics, the rhythms, the melodies,
Yeah.
all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, which is a
Yeah.
shame, actually, But anyway, yeah, those two are absolutely up there. I love what he did in the 90s as well. And then into the 90s, there's, Britpop had a massive impact on me. And I know that everybody gravitates towards Definitely Maybe, and I get why, but for me, it was more Morning Glory, because it was just song after song after song,
Yeah.
which just resonated with me in a way that it didn't make me unique. I was at Nebworth in '96 amongst a
Yes,
field
so was
full
I.
of. Were you really?
I
Oh
was.
wow!
It's
Oh
I did I
wow!
it's the reason I didn't go to the reunion shows. I'm like, I can't recapture that for myself, and actually I regret not going because obviously the reviews were fantastic, so, they got it right, but,
Yeah, but it's never going to be what it was, though, is it? Because Oasis, as a band, the songs are sensational. They led youth culture with by banging the sound of their own drum, and everybody followed, including me, because they were sensational. But they're not an absolutely killer live act. They're very static, right? And that's not a criticism. It's just you know what you're going to get when you see them.
well, also they
Um,
made 2 classic albums, right? So and that was very 90s
yeah,
to make, really, really big date because that's when the industry got overhyped and everything got, the turnover got faster and faster. It was the CD boom years. And so a lot of bands in that era made a couple of good albums and then it was a kind of gradual downward slide because they were under too much pressure by the time they came to the follow-ups, the subsequent albums. They just couldn't match what they'd done. But one of the reasons I wrote the book, one of the initial reasons I wrote Body of Work was I started writing an essay on why some bands were making better albums than ever. I thought about Manic Street Preachers,
yeah.
and maybe not better than ever, really good albums again. Let's
Mm.
just say that. Let's try and be objective about it. Suede, I mean, their last 2 albums have been absolutely fantastic. And to some extent, these are bands who are creatively coming full circle. So they're reinventing themselves by looking back to when they were, what made them originally great. So imagine if Oasis could do this. Imagine if, because I think they are working on new materials, that's the rumor. Imagine
Oh.
if they could somehow tap into what made them great for those first 2 albums and made something that was in that kind of bracket, wouldn't it be a fantastic thing? But it is happening. Other bands are doing it. And I just found that was absolutely remarkable. I really enjoyed the fact that that's possible because again, to me, that is part of why the format is staying alive. And I think it's partly because of vinyl, because vinyl is doing what CD didn't. So CD bloated everything. There was more space on it. So you had to put more tracks on every album. And your artists were tempted to do that. So you had these 14, 16 track albums that had too much filler and they were too long. Whereas vinyl's really tidy, it's really neat, and it's divided into 2 sides. And so you've got this sort of classic 10, 11 track albums that tell the same story that we used to get in the 70s and 80s. And that's partly why it's back. I mean, artists are really, really thinking about this. And this is where I say to record labels, you've got to do this justice.
Yeah.
You've got artists making fantastic albums, taking 2 or 3 years, all the collaboration that goes into it, thinking about the sequencing, they're thinking about the art, with going back to Charlie XCX, the whole concept, side 1, side 2, how it opens, how it closes, how it moves through those phases. And you've got to do that justice somehow in the marketing of that piece of work. And that's what we're not doing in the music industry, because we've got so attached to this idea of it's got to be a song on a playlist, or it's got to be a viral video, or now it's got to be a sync. And if we don't get one of those three things, it's gone. You can forget it. And it's a real
Yeah.
shame. And I think there are alternatives that we've been talking about, listening, coming back, listening rooms, listening parties, just the ritual of playing vinyl. A lot of people are kind of doing that Ed Sheeran ritual themselves. A lot of artists are doing it, but I know a lot of people who are doing it. And people have told me since they've read the book, we've got a WhatsApp group, we've got we've got a WhatsApp group on albums, just with neighbors and friends. And I love that. It's like book clubs.
Yeah. Oh, that is good. Oh,
This
I like
is what
that.
we have to do. We have been seduced by these addictive tech feeds that we know are not very good for us. So we've rumbled that. So now we've got to do something about it. And to me, it's got parallels with the environment. Like if you care about the environment, you've got to start thinking about what you buy, how you do your recycling, just your own carbon footprint. It starts with you.
Yeah.
If you want to be healthier, with all this junk food that we can get, all the sugar that we've been, the sugar rush that we've been all of the stuff been forced to us as in a Western diet. But if you want to be healthy, it's up to you to change that. I feel it's exactly the same way with culture. And it's exactly the same way with music. It is now down to us, the individual. That's why I'm writing books now and advocating this, because it's impossible to fix the music industry. It's lost to some extent. It's, will it come round? I don't know. But us as listeners, we can change it for us. And the experience that we're going to have as a result is much better for us.
Yeah, I think so. It's very, very hard to argue with that, especially for someone like you, Keith, that spent a lot of many, many years working in data and analyzing and strategizing for you to reach that kind of output yourself. That speaks volumes.
Yeah, and I'm trying to live by it, and I'm finding that it can be hard.
Yeah.
So the last time I put a vinyl on and listened right through, it was over a week ago. And I'm saying, well, I should be doing this once a week. And I'm still trying to listen to everything, which is also something you can't possibly do. You've got to be selective, because the idea is to listen to a small amount of what's thrown at you and listen to that repeatedly. That's where the real love comes in. This is why I'm enjoying the Jessica Hoop album, is because I've played it on heavy rotation. And believe me, it gets better.
Wow.
It just reveals itself to you in a way that is just wonderful, like a good book, like a good movie, but better because it's a repetitive process with music. That's why music beats those other cultural formats, actually. The repetition, and then, of course, seeing it live. And I missed the live, actually, but next time she comes around, I want to see that album live. And this is another way we can really enjoy the album culture, is the Resurgence tours, the anniversary tours.
Yeah.
These are great ways of celebrating a catalogue, even a catalogue that's maybe just 5 or 10 years in. And I used that example with Bears Den, the album Island. It's only 10 years old. It didn't chart when it came out, but for them and their fans, that's their classic album. And they toured it live, played the Royal Albert Hall. Bears Den. Who would have thought? You remember? You mentioned Bears Den to someone that, just someone on the street that never heard of them, just like it is today. Who's your favorite band? Oh, it's a band called Shaking Hand. Ever heard of them? No, of course you haven't.
That's it. Yeah, it's a shame actually, because it doesn't need to be that. Hey, let's celebrate this album by doing a tour of this in 20 years, like a lot of people do, and I get why they do it. But actually, when people go and see people live, there's a reason for it, and it's about buying into that experience. But it's often really because there's certain songs that they really like. So if they honed in on that and just Springsteen did it years ago. I know you spoke about Springsteen quite a lot in your book, but he did it a few years ago. He said, "I'm just going to tour Born to Run." I don't know why, but I'm just going to play Born to Run for like this amount of, all these
Yeah.
dates are just going to be Born to Run. I'll do requests and stuff afterwards, and then
Yeah.
I'll do Born in the USA when I come back next year. And it's like, that's great because cinemas do that as well, don't they? Let's
Yeah.
play Back to the Future. Yes, we can do the 25th anniversary, but we're not. This next week, we're just going to play Aliens and Back to the Future 2 because that's what people want to see, and they don't see it on the big screen. So we're going to do that, and it's worked.
Yeah. The only downside with that is it's harder for new culture, because what we're doing there is we're celebrating the classics. Yeah, they were great. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, Born to Run was great. We know that, right? Back to the Future was great. We know that. But you can't tell me that there aren't albums that were released this year, 2026, that aren't as good as Born to Run. Because
No,
I can tell you that, it can't be true, because we have more artists, we have better production, we have, it's more competitive. So in a way, the stuff that gets made has to be really good. But we're just missing it, aren't we? We're missing it in the waterfall of stuff. And we don't know how to celebrate it and take time to really enjoy it. And this is the problem, I think. And this is one of the issues that I think we will need to fix as part of the backlash against, the feed and the doom scroll. So new artists like the Jessica Hoop album, I mean, the Aldous Harding album, I don't know, I don't want to get subjective about it, but I can tell you 10 fantastic albums that have been released so far this year that we need to celebrate as classics. And I'm talking to the industry about this, because Brat would have, classic album, sticker in the corner, wouldn't it? For sure. That's where we started this conversation. And even on a site like Album of the Year, which is an aggregation site I use a lot just to see how an album's gone down with critical reviewers and fans. Great resource, bit like Letterboxd is for films. They've got I think it's called Must Listen. So a must listen album, that there'll be 100 or 200 must listen albums that are released every year, that it doesn't matter when you discover them, but we're losing them on the conveyor belt of stuff.
right.
And meanwhile, we're spending all this time celebrating stuff from the last century. So that's something I think that the industry should solve. And again, it's one of the things we should solve. And you've got to be really careful buying new vinyl. I mean, supporting artists is great, but, there's no point buying a vinyl record really and not listening to it. That's kind of odd to me. You should buy it and listen to it over and over again. So all these things are nice problems, I think, to be solved. But I'm just glad we're having the discussion anyway, because it'd be horrible if we weren't having the discussion, if there were no vinyl records and no albums.
Yeah.
And when I thought about what's happened in the 21st century with Napster and streaming and TikTok and now AI, I thought, well, the album shouldn't really exist by logic, but art doesn't follow logic, and we don't want it to. Why would we want art to follow some sort of logic? And tech is pure logic.
Yeah, well, I'm mindful of time, right? Because I know you need to go. But that's the perfect note to end on.
Okay.
because it feels like a full stop, and it feels conclusive. So, Keith, I thank you so much for talking here today, for sharing yourself, the way you do. You're a fascinating guy. You're loved by many, including me, and I appreciate you.
Well, thanks a lot for saying it, and thanks a lot for being so complimentary about the book. I mean, touche, mate. I love this podcast, but I could be on this all day. We should do it again.
I'd
Let's
love that.
do version 2 when you've had a chance to read Rollercoaster, because I'm really keen to know what you think about that with all the work that you do with up-and-coming artists.
Okay, all right. You have my words. I've got it already because I brought them both together. So that one's next,
Okay.
and then we'll follow up. Okay,
Let's do
sounds
it.
good to me. Thanks,
All right.
Keith.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, there you go. See, I told you he was the great Keith Jopling. What an interesting guy. Do you know, one of the things that really fascinates me about Keith and the way that he talks about music is that if you think about this, right? So he was the research director at IFPI. He's also been a research consultant at the likes of MIDiA, who are like the kind of the go-to in the creative industries on research, and it led him to go to then Spotify and this and that. And he's just very, very in demand and needed by so many record companies to provide insight and strategy to inform them as to what their next steps look like. He's so widely trusted, it's hard to explain how trusted he is. Now, for him to have gone through all of that time of looking at data and looking at insights and this and that, and then he revolves back into the key thing that pulls all of us into music, no matter where we come from or what we do, and that is the love of it. That's why we do this, isn't it? That's why we care. And I know that when I talk on this podcast to you about all the different aspects of music and business and where it's all going, and it all comes from here, right? I mean it. I love it. But without the actual love of music, then none of us would have even got here. And, we have to think about where we're going to go next and how we protect it and all that. And maybe a lot of that is down to how we consume music and actually putting aside the time to be able to go, hey, do you know what? That album that I probably should know and don't, and I know that everybody loves it. Maybe I could love it too. Let me give it a go. Oh no, I don't like it. That's okay, but at least I've tried. Maybe I'll try again. Oh my God, I love it. I've listened to it 3 or 4 times. Now I get it. And then we rejoice, don't we? We connect and we go, oh yeah, I love that. I love that. And we become inspired by music, and those listening habits basically underpin absolutely every single aspect of what brings us together in music and what we build a business out of. That's one of the many things I've learned today. Anyway, I will leave that with you. I thank you for your time of being here and committing yourself to listening, learning, watching, however you're enjoying this. And I thanked Keith for his time today as well. Until next time, everybody, have a great day and may the force be with you.